Allow me at the outset to express our gratitude and appreciation for the National Council on U.S.-Arab Relations and to our dear friend, Dr. Jundook Anthony, its founding president and chief executive officer, for the very excellent organization of this conference. The National Council, since its establishment in 1983, has been able to enrich the relationship between the Arab world and the United States, and to foster a better understanding of the Arab-U.S. strategic partnership with their noble educational mission and through the various programs, publications, and conferences. So thank you very much, Dr. Anthony, for the very hard work you're doing. Excellencies, dear friends and colleagues, our ambassador stood here before you last year and shared with you a sad story of a happy land, the land of Arabia Felix, a country known for its beauties, ancient history, and rich heritage. I'm afraid today, Yemen is still far from happy. Nevertheless, we'll never give up hope. And I'm sure Yemen will once again recover to the prosperous land of Arabia it once was. If you read in history about Yemen, you will find that no matter how difficult circumstances are, Yemenis always find a way to reconcile their differences and achieve peace and stability. I just hope this time it will not take more than it should. At one point in time, many centuries ago, a powerful kingdom in Yemen called the Kingdom of Saba, you may know it as the Kingdom of the Queen of Sheba, dominated and was known for antiquities in the incest trade route that linked many civilizations, including and linking the Mediterranean, Egypt to India and Asia. This kingdom was believed to be one of the most sophisticatedly organized states in Arabia at that time. During its reign, the kingdom managed for a long time not only to flourish, but also to secure and unite vast parts of the region. Dear friends, today Yemen is facing what is now known as the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. The latest statistics of the conflict are shocking, where almost 75% of the population requires some kind of humanitarian assistance, and many millions are at risk of famine. People are suffering, and the only solution to the conflict is by ending the war. But the difficult question is, how do we achieve that, especially after 4 years of conflict? And depending on where you stand or whom you support, the answers of this critical question are different and sometimes even contradictory. Every member of the international community, in some way or another, expressed the urgency and need to end the war in Yemen. But unfortunately, some stop there, and some go a little further and call for some half-thought measures that, if implemented, would unfortunately exacerbate, not abate, the suffering of the Yemeni people, no matter how genuine these efforts are. Dear friends, to really help Yemen, we need to look at the facts, the root cause of the problem, and the new emerging realities on the ground. Only then, I believe, we would be able to have a clear picture of what needs to be done to finally end this protracted conflict. So let me start with the facts. Yemen is not Syria. One of the main differences between the conflict in Yemen and Syria is that we had a well-planned transitional period that was supported locally, regionally, and internationally. This plan was the GCC initiative and its implementation mechanism, without which the conflict in Yemen today would have resembled very much the one in Syria. All the components of the solution in Yemen are there. All the parties in Yemen know that what needs to be done. We had debated the issues for so long, and the framework for ending the conflict is clear. We spent in Kuwait, thankful for their generosity and hospitality, more than 100 days until we were so close to reaching a settlement. What was missing there was the Houthis' will to end the war. They were not ready to make concessions, as the previous UN envoy stated in his last briefing before the Security Council, beginning of this year. Hence, ending the conflict is at the hands of the Houthis. It may take us years, even decades, to recover from the adverse effects of this conflict, but we can start the process of rebuilding Yemen as early as tomorrow, if only the Houthis choose to end the conflict today. As for the root cause of the conflict in Yemen today, unfortunately, is still being portrayed in some international outlet media as a war between a rich, powerful country called Saudi Arabia and a poor nation called Yemen. This depiction gives the false impression that the Saudi-led coalition has started the war and that by ending the intervention, Yemen will achieve peace. Nothing could be further from the truth. Yemen is not at war with Saudi Arabia, and ending the Arab coalition will not end the war. Yemen, after the Arab Spring and after months of sittings, which were faced with a brutal crackdown by the ruling regime back then, was about to enter into a civil war as early as 2011. Then, with the help of our neighboring countries, in particular the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Yemen entered into a new promising stage, a transitional period guided by the GCC initiative. As a result, we had a new government, we had a new elected president, and we managed to finish an all-inclusive national dialogue, which produced a constitution which would have transformed Yemen into a new democratic federal state. But right before the end of the transitional period, the Houthis, which were part of the transition, had a different plan. They knew that the new Yemen, as stipulated in our national conference, would not make them rule, and they would gain by force more than they would through elections. So they staged a coup. And that is, my dear friends, is the main cause of the conflict, a mere outrageous lust for power. As for the new emerging realities on the ground, the ongoing conflict is not just claiming lives and destroying infrastructure. It is also affecting Yemen's social cohesion, which will take a lot harder and longer to repair. We're starting to see new sets of social identities forming, not based on ethnicity or geography, but rather based on propagandas run by both the Houthis and Al-Qaeda on the Arabian Peninsula, the two groups that have gained most since the start of the conflict. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have been asked by many who are very genuinely concerned about Yemen here in the United States, why not end the war? Why not just end the Arab coalition intervention? The truth of the matter is, if our brothers in the Arab coalition, namely the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, decided to end their support, Yemen will descend further into chaos. If that happens, and the Arab coalition withdrew, you may no longer see Yemen covered much in the news agencies, but that would not mean the suffering of Yemenis has ceased. The only way to end this conflict is to reach a political settlement through the United Nations-led process. And the only way for the Houthis, or for us to persuade the Houthis to come back to the negotiating table, is through military pressure and through stopping Iran's support for the Houthis. I'm afraid there is no other way. Dear friends, the government of Yemen is and has always been keen on peace. We participated in 3 rounds of UN peace talks and showed up to the 4th round that the Houthis refused to attend. The Houthis made the last talk a failure, not the legitimate government of President Hadi. We came and we waited for 3 days for the Houthis to come up or to show, and they didn't. Indeed, Yemen continues to support the peace efforts of the UN envoy, Mr. Martin Griffiths, including his ongoing efforts to restart the peace talks. We remain hopeful and continue to engage positively in all future talks. U.S. Secretary of Defense, General James Mattis, a few days ago during the Manama Dialogue Security Conference stated that Iran's support for the Houthis, and I quote, prolongs and expands the conflict in Yemen, adds to humanitarian suffering, threatens social waterways, and disrupts efforts for sustainable peace, end of quote. Yemen values the U.S. administration's stance on Iran. We believe sending the right signals to the Houthis and their supporters, Iran, which continues to destabilize the region, exports terrorism and violence, and threatens navigation in the Red Sea through its proxies will have a positive effect in the next round of peace talks in Yemen. Yemen needs her friends now more than ever, and we call upon all the international community to exert the utmost pressure on Iran to stop supporting the Houthis so they can come back to the negotiating table. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity here to share with you, and hopefully next time we'll have a happier story about happy Arabia. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Al-Hadhrami. You did a superb job on short notice representing Yemen. In addition to what His Excellency mentioned about Yemen, what I've failed to see included in the media accounts is the following. I know of no Arab country that has had a more vibrant democratic development dynamic process in the last 40 years than Yemen. I say this because I have been an official observer in all of Yemen's presidential elections and its parliamentary elections as well. In 1993, 1997, 2000, 2006. And on the basis of those elections being as free and open and transparent as they were, then Clinton administration Secretary of State Madeleine Albright could have chosen any of 130 developing countries, but she chose Yemen to host an emerging democracies forum in 1998. I was one of the 2 American private sector representatives to it. I've never been to anything like that in my entire life. And one could overhear others who were there for the first time wishing that they had been exposed to that country, its people, and its culture before then. The president of Mali spoke. On my left sat the representative from Mongolia. On my right sat the representative from Mozambique. There were representatives from El Salvador, Bolivia, Jordan, Bahrain, Morocco, and about 5 other countries. And the sponsors were unique. Ireland was one of the sponsors. The Netherlands was one. Canada was one, together with Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. That Yemen was singled out for the openness of its system, not just politically, but also in terms of media. In fact, there were some in the American embassy who were trying to keep up with the number of free Yemeni newspapers who pleaded exhaustion from trying to have fulsome accounts of newspapers and other communications outlets that, from one perspective, were irresponsible. That is to say, they got away with saying practically everything. And this was also in the build-up to the international isolation of Saddam Hussein. There were even 2 small parties that represented different branches of the Ba'athist party, the Iraqi branch and the Syrian branch. They were minuscule in number. But they had Islam, which is the face of the Muslim Brotherhood there. They had the remnants of the National Liberation Front that fought the British for their independence in the South, and the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen Socialist Party, the last remnant of a Marxist-Leninist political government, and the first anywhere in the Arab world. I point this out to embellish upon His Excellency's portrait of the diversity of the Yemeni people, the vibrancy of them, the dynamism of them. As an election observer, being in the polling booths, being in the counting stations, being in the recounting stations, being in the equivalent once of the Electoral College, where they let me sit with the top 13 people who were going to determine who won and who did not win. And of course, the ones that got the fewer votes demanded recounts all the way from 10 o'clock in the evening till 6 o'clock in the morning, after which I had to bow out there. But I've never seen the likes of this anywhere else in the Arab world. Throughout, people said, oh, the Saudi Arabians must be quaking in their boots there that this is happening. No. The media carried that story, but the truth was the opposite. Any more than the elections in Yemen in 1961, 64, 67, 71, 75, 80, and beyond. Those elections in Kuwait were rambunctious and dispirited, and some would say overly spirited there. And this had no impact on Saudi Arabia. To try to test whether the media was correct and where it was getting its information from, I queried as many Saudi Arabians as I could. And they said, look, this is their country. These are their rules. These are their regulations. These are their people. These are their practices. This is their culture. These are their institutions. We have no right to interfere in all of those any more than they have a right to interfere in ours. And so we're not going to be the one that will interfere in theirs for fear of being vulnerable should they want to interfere in ours. We won't do it. And to the best of my knowledge, they did not do it. Having been an observer, I never saw a shred of evidence on this. Some of you old enough or young enough, depending on your age, to remember when Nelson Mandela came to power in South Africa after so many years of apartheid there, and the pictures of the people lining up to vote, they were as far as the eye could see. This was the same thing in Yemen. There. And the first election, arriving at the polls before 7:30 in the morning, they were almost a mile long of women and men. And women got the vote just the same time that the men did. And women ran as candidates and were elected, not to the same extent by any means as men. But those three aspects, beyond the openness and freeness and transparency of the elections, set an example that many need to study. For those who are looking for master's topics or PhD dissertations, the archives of the National Democratic Institute and the International Republican Institute and the International Foundation for Electoral System, I've represented all of them, are rich and they're voluminous. So one cannot say that there are inadequate examples of Arab experiments and greater openness in their political systems and in freedom of expression. I know of no country that ranks ahead of Yemen in terms of what it has scored on those fronts. I just wanted to add that. In addition to the complexity, put yourself in the shoes of a Yemeni and think over a 40-year period. Some of you would have answered the question, where are you from? Well, I'm from the Crown Colony of Aden. Well, where are you from? Well, I'm from Lahej. What's Lahej? Well, Lahej is a sheikhdom not far from Aden, outside of Aden. and you both say you're from Yemen, or you're both Yemenis. Well, where are you from? Well, I'm from Makalla. What's Makalla? Well, Makalla is in the Hadhrami. It's a port that opens onto the Indian Ocean, and it's in the direction of Oman, but it's a good distance from Oman. And the young woman who spoke yesterday so movingly, Leen Badib, yes, she's from Jeddah, but her ancestral roots are in the Hadramaut, in Shibam, in the world's first skyscrapers, the Manhattan of the desert. And others said, no, I'm from northern Yemen, in Sana'a, from the Mutawakkilite kingdom of Yemen. What's that? Well, it's a dynasty, a monarchy that goes back several centuries in northern Yemen, and it's based sometimes mainly in Sana'a, but occasionally it's been based in Taiz. Well, where are you from? Well, I'm from Socotra. What's Socotra? Well, Socotra, we live on an island way out there in the Indian Ocean. And some days it seems nearer to East Africa than the mainland of Yemen. Where are you from? Well, I'm from Taiz. I heard you say Taiz there. What's Taiz? Well, Taiz is a bustling commercial city in between Sana'a and Aden. Well, what's the name of your country, of this place that you're from? Well, I'm from the Yemen Arab Republic after the overthrow of the dynasty. Well, are you still a No, we changed our name. Now we are the Yemen Republic. And what about you? You're still colonized? No, we are the People's Republic of South Yemen. Could you have a stamp? Well, I could give you one, except we just changed our name. We are now the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen. Imagine if you lived in a country like that and people asked you to define yourself and something with regard to your identity. Come on. No one has had the remotest experience of something like that. This gentleman is a representative of this richness and this diversity of people, and you can see it in his persona and his gait and his manner of speaking. We'll switch now to a country that knows something about Yemen, namely Egypt.